Teachings of Lord Caitanya, the Golden Avatar, a treatise on factual spiritual life, by His Divine Grace A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada, founder Acharya of the International Society for Krishna Consciousness. Chapter 17, Lord Caitanya, the Original Personality of Godhead. And with this chapter, we begin part 2 of 2 of the book. Following in the footsteps of Kaviraj Krishnadas Goswami, we offer our respectful obeisances unto the lotus feet of Lord Caitanya. Lord Caitanya is described as follows. He is the only shelter for the forlorn, the most fallen, and he is the only hope for those who are completely devoid of spiritual knowledge. Let us try to discuss his great contribution of devotional service. The supremely powerful Lord Krishna becomes manifest in 5 different features. Although he is one without a second, in order to serve 5 specific spiritual purposes, he becomes manifest in 5 ways. Such diversity is eternal and blissful, in contrast to the conception of monotonous oneness. From the Vedic literature, we can understand that the Absolute Truth, the Supreme Personality of Godhead, eternally exists with his diverse energies. Lord Caitanya appeared with full diverse energies, and they are 5 in number. Therefore, Lord Caitanya is said to be Krishna with diverse energies. There is no difference between the energy and the energetic in regard to the Lord's appearance as Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu and his 4 associates, Nityananda Prabhu, Advaita Prabhu, Gadadhar Pandit, and Srivas Thakur. Among these 5 diverse manifestations of the Supreme Lord, as the Lord himself and his expansion, incarnation, devotional energy, and devotee, there is no spiritual difference. They are 5 in one absolute truth. For the sake of relishing transcendental flavors in the absolute truth, there are 5 diverse manifestations. These are called the form of a devotee, the identity of a devotee, the incarnation of a devotee, the devotional energy, and the pure devotee. Out of the 5 diversities in the absolute truth, the form of Lord Caitanya is that of the original personality of Godhead, Krishna. Lord Nityananda is the manifestation of the first expansion of the Supreme Lord. Similarly, Advaita Prabhu is an incarnation of the Supreme Lord. These 3, Chaitanya, Nityananda, and Advaita, belong to the category of Vishnu Tattva, or the Supreme Absolute Truth. Srivas represents the pure devotee, and Gadadhar represents the internal energy of the Lord for the advancement of pure devotion. Therefore, Gadadhar and Srivas, although on the Vishnu platform, are dependent, diverse energies of the Supreme Lord. In other words, they are not different from the energetic, but they are manifested diversely for the sake of relishing transcendental relationships. The whole process of devotional service involves a transcendental reciprocation of the flavors of relationship between the worshipper and the worshipped. Without such a diverse exchange of transcendental flavors, devotional service has no meaning. In the Vedic literature, Katha Upanishad, it is stated that the Supreme Lord is the supreme living entity among all living entities. There are innumerable living entities, but there is one living entity who is the Supreme Absolute Godhead. The difference between the singular living entity and the plural living entities is that the singular living entity is the Lord of all. Lord Caitanya is that supreme living entity, and he descended to reclaim the innumerable fallen living entities. In other words, the specific purpose of Lord Caitanya's advent was to establish in the present age the Vedic fact that there is one supreme personality of Godhead predominating and maintaining all the other innumerable living entities. Because the impersonalist Mayavadi philosophers cannot understand this, Lord Caitanya advented himself to enlighten the people in general about the real nature of the relationship between the Supreme and the many dependent living entities. In the Bhagavad Gita, Krishna's last instruction is that everyone should give up all other engagements and render devotional service unto him. But after Krishna's disappearance, less intelligent people misunderstood him. They became contaminated with the Mayavada philosophy, which produced so many mental speculators that people forgot the actual position of the absolute truth and the living entity. Therefore, Lord Sri Krishna himself, as Lord Caitanya, again appeared in order to teach the fallen souls of this material world the way to approach Lord Krishna. The Bhagavad Gita teaches that one should give up everything and be done with this world of material attachment. A pure devotee of Lord Krishna and one who follows the philosophy of Lord Caitanya are one and the same. Chaitanya's philosophy is that one should give up everything and worship God, Krishna. Krishna, as the Supreme Lord, the personality of Godhead, spoke the same words, indicating himself as the Supreme Lord. But the Mayavadi philosophers misunderstood him. Therefore, Lord Caitanya, to clarify the situation, reiterated Lord Krishna's message. One should not declare himself to be as good as Krishna, but should worship Krishna as the Supreme Lord. We make a great mistake if we think Lord Caitanya is a conditioned soul. He is to be understood as the supreme absolute truth, the personality of Godhead, Sri Krishna himself. In the Chaitanya Charitamrita, it is therefore said of Lord Caitanya, quote, Krishna is now present in his 5 diverse manifestations, unquote. Unless one is situated in uncontaminated goodness, it is very difficult to understand Lord Caitanya as the Supreme Personality of Godhead himself. Thus, in order to understand Lord Caitanya, one has to follow the direct disciples of Lord Caitanya, the 6 Goswamis, and especially the path chalked out by Srila Jiva Goswami. The most astonishing fact is that Lord Caitanya, although the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Krishna, never displayed himself as Krishna. Rather, whenever intelligent devotees detected that he was Lord Krishna and addressed him as Lord Krishna, he denied it. Indeed, he sometimes placed his hands over his ears, protesting that a human being should not be addressed as the Supreme Lord. Indirectly, he was teaching the Mayavadi philosophers that one should never falsely pose himself as the Supreme Lord and thereby misguide his followers. Nor should the followers be foolish enough to accept anyone and everyone as the Supreme Personality of Godhead. One should test by consulting scriptures and by seeing the activities of the person in question. One should not, however, mistake Lord Caitanya and his 5 diverse manifestations for ordinary human beings. Lord Caitanya is the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Krishna himself. The beauty of Lord Caitanya is that although he is the Supreme Lord, he came as a great devotee to teach all conditioned souls how devotional service should be rendered. Conditioned souls who are interested in devotional service should follow in the exemplary footsteps of Lord Caitanya to learn how Krishna can be attained by devotional service. Thus, the Supreme Lord himself teaches the conditioned soul how he should be approached by devotional service. By analytically studying the 5 diverse manifestations of the Supreme Lord, we can come to know that Lord Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu is the supreme absolute truth and that Lord Nityananda is his immediate expansion. We can also come to understand that Advaita Prabhu is also in the category of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, but is subordinate to Lord Chaitanya and Nityananda Prabhu. The Supreme Personality of Godhead and his immediate and subordinate expansion are worshipable by the other 2, namely the representation of the internal potency and the representation of the marginal potency. The representation of the internal potency, Gadadhar, represents the confidential devotee, and the representation of the marginal potency, Srivas, represents the pure devotee. Both of these are worshippers of the other 3, but all 4 of the Lord's expansions, whether in the worshipable category, Nityananda and Advaita, or the worshipper category, Gadadhar and Srivas, are engaged in the transcendental loving service of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. There is a specific difference between the pure devotee and the confidential devotee. The different potencies of the Lord are engaged in serving the Supreme Lord in different transcendental relationships. They are situated in conjugal love, in parental affection, in friendship, or in servitude. By judging impartially, one can find that the internal potencies of the Supreme Lord, who are engaged in conjugal love with the Lord, are the best of all devotees. Thus, both internal devotees and confidential devotees are attracted by the conjugal love of the Supreme Absolute Truth. These are the most confidential devotees of Lord Caitanya. Other pure devotees, who are more or less attached to Sri Nityananda Prabhu and Advaita Prabhu, are attracted by other transcendental relationships, such as parental affection, friendship, and servitorship. When such devotees are very much attached to the activities of Lord Caitanya, they at once become confidential devotees in conjugal love with the Supreme Lord. There is a very nice song sung by Sri Narottam Das Thakur, a great devotee and acharya in the disciplic succession from Lord Caitanya. Narottam Das sings, quote, "When will there be transcendental eruptions all over my body simply by my hearing the name of Gauranga? When will tears incessantly flow from my eyes simply by my uttering the names of the Lord? When will Lord Nityananda have mercy upon me and make all my desires for material enjoyment insignificant? When shall I be purified by giving up all contaminations of material enjoyment? And when shall I be able to see the transcendental abode, Vrindavan? When shall I be eager to accept the 6 Goswamis as my prime guides? And when will I be able to understand the conjugal love of Krishna?" Unquote. No one should be eager to understand the conjugal love of Krishna without undergoing disciplinary training under the 6 Goswamis of Vrindavan. The Sankirtan movement, inaugurated by Lord Caitanya, is a transcendental pastime of the Lord. Quote, "By it I live simultaneously to preach and popularize this movement in the material world." Unquote. In that Sankirtan movement of Lord Caitanya, Nityananda and Advaita are his expansions, and Gadadhar and Srivas are his internal and marginal potencies, respectively. The living entities are also called marginal potency because they have either of two attitudes, namely, the tendency to surrender unto Krishna and the tendency to become independent of him and try for material enjoyment. Due to this propensity for material enjoyment, the living entity becomes contaminated by the material world. When a living entity is dominated by a desire for material enjoyment and becomes entangled in material life, he is subjected to the threefold miseries of material existence. There is a nice example showing how Lord Chaitanya's Sankirtan movement can save one from the miseries of material existence. The desire for material enjoyment is just like a seed sown in the earth. If a seed is inundated by too much water, there is no possibility of its fructifying. Similarly, if a conditioned soul is captivated by material enjoyment because the seed of such enjoyment is within his heart, he can be overwhelmed and overpowered by a flood of transcendental activities performed in love of Godhead. In this way, his seed of material enjoyment cannot fructify into a conditioned life of material existence. The conditioned living entities in the present age of Kali are being overpowered by the flood of love of God inaugurated by Lord Caitanya and his associates. In this connection, there is a verse written by His Holiness Prabodhananda Saraswati in his book Sri Chaitanya Chandramrita. This verse states that materialistic persons are very enthusiastic to maintain their family members, wife, and children, and that there are also many mystic speculators who are engaged in speculating about liberation from the miseries of material life, and who therefore undergo various austerities and penances. but those who have discovered the greatest transcendental flavor in the movement of Lord Caitanya Mahaprabhu no longer have a taste for such activities. Those who are under the impression that there is material contamination in the form of the Supreme Personality of Godhead and in his devotional service are called Mayavadis. According to their imperfect speculation, the impersonal Brahman is the only existence in the cosmic manifestation. As soon as the Supreme Personality of Godhead is introduced, they consider that his personality arises from Maya, or the external material energy. Such persons consider all incarnations of the Supreme Lord to be contaminated by this material nature. According to them, the material body and the activities of matter are all that give a living being an individual identity. According to them, liberation means the end of an individual identity for the pure living being. In other words, the Mayavadis maintain that when a living entity is liberated, he becomes one with the Supreme Impersonal Brahman. According to such Mayavad philosophy, the personality of Godhead, his abode, his devotional service, and his emotional devotees are all under the spell of Maya and are consequently subjected to the material condition. Those who forget the transcendental nature of the Supreme Lord, his abode, his devotional service, and his devotees consider all these to be but manifestations of material activity. One who thinks that there is a possibility of arguing about transcendence is called an agnostic, and one who thinks that there is a possibility of criticizing transcendence is called an atheist. Lord Caitanya wanted to accept all kinds of agnostics, atheists, skeptics, and unfaithfuls, and swallow them in the flood of love of God. Therefore, he accepted the renounced order of life to attract all these forces. Lord Caitanya remained a householder until his 24th year, and in the 25th year of his life, he accepted the renounced order. After accepting the renounced order, sannyas, he attracted many other sannyasis. When he had been spreading the Sankirtan movement as a family man, many Mayavadi sannyasis did not take his movement very seriously. But after the Lord accepted the sannyas order of life, he delivered not only Mayavadi sannyasis, but speculative students, atheists, and those who were attached to fruitive activities and unnecessary criticism. The Lord was so kind that he accepted all these people and delivered to them the most important factor in life, love of God. To fulfill his mission of bestowing love of God upon the conditioned souls, Lord Caitanya devised many methods to attract those who were uninterested in love of God. After he accepted the renounced order, all the agnostics, critics, atheists, and mental speculators became his students and followers. Even many who were not Hindus and who did not follow the Vedic principles accepted Lord Caitanya as the supreme teacher. The only persons who avoided the mercy of Sri Caitanya Mahaprabhu were those sannyasis who were known as the Mayavadi philosophers of Benares. Their plight is described by Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Goswami, quote, "The Mayavadi philosophers of Benares were less intelligent because they wanted to measure everything by direct perception. On this basis, they calculated that whatever is perceived by material means is Maya or illusion. Since Maya is full of variegatedness and the absolute truth is transcendental to Maya, they concluded that there is no variegatedness in the absolute truth," unquote. During Chaitanya Mahaprabhu's time, there were also other impersonalist philosophers, known as the Mayavadi philosophers of Saranata. Saranata is a place near Benares where Buddhist philosophers used to reside, and even today, many stupas of the Buddhist Mayavadis can be seen. The Mayavadi philosophers of Saranata are different from the impersonalists who believe in the impersonal manifestation of Brahman. According to the Saranata philosophers, there is no spiritual existence at all. The fact is that both the Mayavadi philosophers of Benares and the philosophers of Saranata are entrapped by material nature. None of them actually know the nature of the absolute transcendence. Although superficially accepting the Vedic principles and considering themselves transcendentalists, the philosophers of Benares do not accept spiritual variegatedness. Because they have no information about devotional service, they are called non-devotees, or those who are against the devotional service of Lord Krishna. The impersonalists speculate on the Supreme Personality of Godhead and his devotees and subject them to the tests of direct perception. But the Lord, his devotees, and his devotional service are not subject to direct perception. In other words, spiritual variegatedness is unknown to the Mayavadi philosophy. Therefore, all the Mayavadi philosophers and sannyasis criticized Lord Caitanya when he was conducting his Sankirtan movement. They were surprised to see Lord Caitanya chanting and dancing after he accepted his sannyas order from Keshava Bharati, for Keshava Bharati belonged to the Mayavadi school. Since Lord Caitanya therefore also belonged to the Mayavadi sect of sannyasis, the Mayavadis were surprised to see him engaged in chanting and dancing instead of hearing or reading the Vedanta Sutras, as is the custom. The Mayavadi philosophers are very fond of the Vedanta, and they misinterpret it in their own way. Misunderstanding their own position, they criticized Lord Caitanya as an unauthorized sannyasi, arguing that because he was a sentimentalist, he was not actually a bona fide sannyasi. All these criticisms were carried to Lord Caitanya when he was at Benares, and he was not at all surprised at them. He even smiled when the news was carried to him. He did not associate with the Mayavadi sannyasis, but remained alone and executed his own mission. After staying for some days in Benares, he started for Mathura.